You're listening to the Faith and Business Podcast with me, your host, Elle Edwards, from the Faith and Business Playground, here with Bible-friendly brain gymnastics to help make your day-to-day life and business more delightful. In today's episode of the podcast, I am introducing you to the Perfect Ordinary Day exercise. Now, yes, if you followed along at the end of December, you will have heard me talk about this in our Facebook Live. We had a whole week where I was talking about goal setting and planning for 2019. However, 2019 is now here. Happy New Year, by the way. 2019 is here, and Facebook Lives don't live forever. And so I thought it was really important to take some time in today's episode to dig into this idea of the perfect ordinary day, because it's actually really helpful as you get ready for a new year. And I can't take credit for this one. This actually came via Frank Kern. Now, depending on what kind of internet circles you've been around in, you might know Frank Kern's name. He of the yellow highlighter brigade, like traditional internet marketers, and they have the really high pressure sales pages. And but Frank Kern's a bit of a dude. He can be quite entertaining. What frustrated me, I sat through a 2-hour video. I'm not even kidding you. I sat through a 2-hour video of Frank Kern's in order to get to the perfect ordinary day exercise. Now, the perfect ordinary day exercise is really valuable. And so I'm really glad I did stick with it. However, it doesn't need 2 hours in order for you to get what this is about. And so ever since watching that and forcing myself to go through 2 hours of it, and it was only because a friend at the time said, "Oh, you should watch this. It's going to be really useful to you," that I even got to the end of it, I've got to say. So you can thank me afterwards for having saved you 2 hours of your life. Because what the perfect ordinary day exercise is about identifying ultimately about what is important to you. What would you like your life to look like? And so I want you to imagine that, now there's a couple of important caveats with this. For the purposes of this exercise, normal geographical limits do not apply. For the purposes of this exercise, your day-to-day, what's the word I'm looking for? Expectations, or the commitments that you have, the things that you have to do each day. I'm thinking like children, school run, all that sort of stuff. That doesn't apply. Briefly, you're going to suspend that for the moment. And the other thing that doesn't apply when you're doing this exercise is the usual rules of time. For example, you can write in your perfect ordinary day that you want to have breakfast in your house and then you want to go and deliver a keynote speech in New York. It doesn't matter for the purposes of this exercise that you can't physically get from your house to New York from breakfast until lunchtime. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's not about that. This is about letting your imagination run wild. This is about having fun. This is about playing. All right. So that's the other thing to say as well. There are no right or wrong answers with this exercise. This is for your eyes only. You don't have to share this with anybody else. It doesn't even matter if you don't see how it could possibly happen. That's irrelevant at the moment. There are steps we can take to help you make that happen. And that's, for future conversations. The whole purpose of the perfect ordinary day exercise is for you to imagine if you had to live the same day over and over again, and we're talking about ordinary days. So we're not talking about your birthday. We're not talking about Christmas. We're not talking about when you're on holiday. This is an ordinary day-to-day day. Day-to-day day. That's a funny phrase to say. So imagine it's a Tuesday, for example. It's any day of the week where you've got the normal day-to-day. Imagine that your day-to-day day was perfect. What would your perfect ordinary day look like? And that's the question you want to answer with this exercise. And you want to dig deep. You want to think specifics. You don't want to be painting with broad pictures. You don't want to be general. You want to think about, where will you wake up? How will you wake up? Who will you wake up with? What will you do when you wake up? Where will you have breakfast? Who will you have breakfast with? What will you have for breakfast? Will you do anything before breakfast? And you want to then go through your day piece by piece and write it down. Like, don't even just do this in your head, actually write it down. Now, I know I'm saying that with a great big smile on my face. I've been there, I've done that. When people say, oh yeah, you got to write it down, and you go, yeah, okay. And then you just nod along. No, don't nod along for this one. It's going to take you some time for this one. I want you to set aside an hour. Find an hour when you can write this uninterrupted, and just free flow. Just throw out everything and anything, even if you think it's not feasibly possible, even if it's not practical, it doesn't matter. Throw it all out there. What would you like to do after you've had your breakfast and you've done this, that, and that? Like, what will you do next? What work will you do? Where will you do the work? What kind of work will you do? What will it look like? How will you feel as you're doing the work? Who will you do the work with? Will you stop for lunch? What time will you stop for lunch? Where will you have lunch? All of this stuff. Remember, this is an ordinary day. So you are working, but what that work looks like within the context of your perfect ordinary day, that's up to you. And so I want you to play with this and see what comes up. And we are in next week's episode. We're going to then be looking at a next step with that. Because I'm not going to say because, I'm going to dig into that next week. So what I guess I want to say right now is, don't worry if it feels unrealistic. I want to give you a concrete example. I'll give you this example now because I'll have another example for next week. When I first did this exercise, one of my dream scenarios was having breakfast as a family together outside all year round. Now, if you lived in Australia or you lived somewhere warm and sunny, that wouldn't be quite so ridiculous. However, I live in South Wales, where it rains a lot, where it's cold a lot. So on the face of it, it was a completely ridiculous thing to write down, because how is it possible? Leaving aside the fact that my husband and my youngest daughter are both terrible in the mornings. They're rubbish at breakfast. Leaving that aside for a moment, and so, getting them down for breakfast would be a struggle. But leaving that aside, just the logistics of getting the five of us outside eating together when it's raining and cold and wet and horrible. There's no way that could happen. However, what's fascinating to me is that having put that idea out there, your brain will start to get to work. And at the time of recording this, no, we're not having breakfast outside all the time. However, we are taking steps towards it. So, for example, in our house now, there's a room. It used to be like a playroom when the children were small. It then became the room where the rabbit and the guinea pigs lived. The rabbit has now passed away. She passed away this year, sadly, and the guinea pigs live elsewhere. So this room now has no purpose other than there's just stuff in there. So one of my goals, the way I see this evolving, is ultimately that this, what we call the playroom, is like a lean-to. It leaks. It's not really terribly useful. It's too hot in the winter, too cold in the summer. It's like a poor man's conservatory without all the benefits. So ultimately, the way I see this evolving is to knock it down and then have like a patio and a pergola, and with like a sort of mini roof thing and like patio heaters. We're not there yet, but we are one step closer to it than we were perhaps 12 months ago, because that space is at least now clear. And the room that it leads from has now got the pool table come dining room table in there. So I can imagine that even on the colder days, once we get that knocked down, even on a colder day, we could have breakfast in what feels like more like outside, because we could open the doors to outside and it'd be effectively like outside. So my point being that even if you can't see how realistically it can be possible, your brain will help you fill in the blanks, and your brain will help you get examples of something like it, or something that will give you that ultimate same feeling. Because for me, the reason why I like the idea of being outside all together as a family, it was the fresh air, and it was the together piece. Well, having breakfast in the dining room with the double doors open is us together. That's the together piece. And we get the fresh air piece. So I can still have those same feelings, even if the specifics aren't exactly how I wrote them down when I first did that exercise. So that's just my encouragement to you, and my example of how it doesn't matter if you can't see how it's possible. It doesn't matter that you can't see it be possible at all even. You will surprise yourself. But the very first step is getting those words and those thoughts out of your head and onto a piece of paper. Because until you do that, you won't actually know what's important to you. And what's fascinating to me is you write these things, stuff will come up that you were like, oh, I didn't expect that. And you will find out things about yourself and your life and your business that you didn't even realize was there. So that's the real power of that exercise. So if you haven't done this, or if you haven't done it for a very long time, full disclosure, it was many years ago that I did this exercise. How many years ago? Maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I am going to be doing it again over the next couple of weeks, because it's fun. I love doing it, and it's interesting to see what changes. Like when I wrote mine the first time, I was still running, and so part of my perfect ordinary day was running along the beach at 6 a.m. I do live by the sea, I hasten to add, so it's not like I live landlocked and that's completely impossible. But I'm not running. I'm doing kettlebells and box fit and stuff. So that part of it has changed. So I think it does need a revisit. So if this is an exercise you've never done before, or you haven't done it for a long time, or things have been shifting for you and you want some clarity, I would encourage you to do that, because what will come up will be wonderful and probably surprising. And it will help you as you get ready for what is coming up next in the rest of your year. Okay? Incidentally, I do dig into the Perfect Ordinary Day exercise. I've got a little tiny nonfiction goal setting and planning book called Happily Ever After. I mentioned it in the wrap party edition of the podcast. I'll mention it again now because it is relevant. I shall link to it in the show notes. It's free, and it will guide you through that process. If you're the kind of person who maybe you listen, but then you also like to read something, it will give you something to read. So I shall link to that in the show notes. It's called Happily Ever After, though, and you can find it on Amazon as well. In next week's episode, though, we're going to be looking at how you can start living your perfect ordinary day today, even when nothing has changed, which I know probably, depending on how far out there your perfect ordinary day is, that might sound really impractical. But hear me out. It is possible. All parts of it are possible. And that's what we're going to be digging into next week on Tuesday's episode. In the meantime, though, thank you for listening, and Happy New Year. I look forward to catching up with you very soon. I've been Elle Edwards, the Mindset Geek from the Faith and Business Playground. Take care. Bye-bye.